Greetings, 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 good people, and welcome to episode 15 of Black Women Are Dope AF. This is my storytelling series to reclaim our ancestral mothers' wisdom and amplify the brilliance, the beauty, and the power of Black women, and to remind us just how dope we are. This series also is a growing archive of Black women's leadership and truth across time and space to resist erasure, rewrite our narratives, and make sure that we stay centered in our own damn stories. This episode today is part of my special June Pride series where we're honoring women and femmes and the LGBTQ plus community as a whole as a part of this Black Women Are Dope as Fuck series. I'm Barbara Ohuninifa. I'm an author, an ancestral strategist, and the creator of Your Soul Knows the Assignment, which is my newest course on decoding karmic patterns and walking your sacred contract with clarity and power. So if you're ready to stop spinning and start healing, check the link in the description. Schedule a vibe check call so we can talk about if the course is for you or any other coaching and things that I can offer. I can just give you resources. The course starts June 26th. So if you're seeing or watching or hearing this before that, that's when we get started. And even if it's after, schedule a vibe check call because I will be doing another cohort later in the year and we can work together individually. But today, in this episode, we are honoring Mama Josephine Baker. She danced in defiance and she danced in defiance and she lived in love and liberation. She was Black, she was queer, and she was unbothered, honey, okay? So I'm going to share, as I always do, her story. I'm going to tell you why I think she's dope. And I welcome you to add into the comments reasons why you think she's dope, things that you know about her and her life and how she may have inspired you in any way. And then stick around to the end because I'll share some tips and medicine based on her wisdom, the legacy that she left behind for us that Black women and femmes can use today to apply to our lives to make our lives better, to flow in a more consistent and aligned way with who we are. So if all that resonates with you, definitely hit subscribe and ring the bell so that you don't miss an episode. So let's get into it. So her story, Mama Josephine Baker, she was born Frida Josephine McDonald in 1906 in St. Louis, Missouri. She survived poverty, racial terror, and street violence to become the woman that we know as Josephine Baker. So her mother, Carrie, was a single parent for much of Josephine's childhood, and she supported her children through domestic work and laundry. Now, Josephine began working as a domestic servant at the age of 8. She was placed in white households as a live-in helper. But when one family burned her hands for failing to polish the silver properly, she ran away. Now, to be clear, her own family, Josephine's own family, was extremely poor and struggling, so they couldn't protect her. So rather than continue to live in this abusive white household that had burned her, she ran away at the age of 8. She slept in cardboard shelters. She scavenged for food. She danced on the street corners for coins. And she never really fully returned to her mother's home. By the age of 10, she was dancing, um, continuing to dance on the streets for coins. And by age 11 or 12, she joined a street performance troupe and began climbing that vaudeville ladder, first as a comedic dancer and then as a chorus girl. She was essentially an independent person before she was a teenager. She's been known to say that she was an old woman by the time she was 10. Now, when she was 11, understand this was happening at the same time. So she's in St. Louis or in the St. Louis area. And so 11, she's living on the streets. She's starting to do more performances with the street troupe and climbing the vaudeville ladder. At the same time, the East St. Louis race riots happened. And being there just nearby in Missouri, she witnessed those riots and the impact of it. And she's been known to say that though that experience and that witness, that violence profoundly shaped her worldview and deeply politicized her. So the East St. Louis massacre was one of the deadliest episodes of racial violence in the U.S. It took place in just across the river from St. Louis over 2 or 3 days, from about July 1st to the 3rd in 1917. Oddly enough, right before 4th of July. I'm just saying, celebrating what this country often does celebrate. So what happened was white labor unions were angry about Black workers being used as strike breakers by employers during a labor dispute at an aluminum plant. Now, because Black migration was from the South was increasing during the Great Migration, tensions grew. There were a lot more Black people, and white people didn't like that. And let's be clear, we're talking about labor unions and workers. We're talking about white men didn't like that. So rather than get angry at the employers, kind of like what's happening now, they were getting angry at the Black people that were coming, the Black men that were coming to work there. So white mobs, stoked by these supposed union fears and their own racial hatred, they started attacking Black residents just all willy-nilly. Not their employers, not the companies that were hiring the Black people to break the strike line. They attacked the Black residents. Over 300 homes and Black businesses were burned. Of course, there's never an exact count, but it's said that between 40 and 200 Black people were murdered. Exact count unknown. They know what the count was, and it probably was more than 200. They didn't bother to count the bodies. They didn't bother to count the carnage that ensued. And those who survived, still were beaten or lynched or even burned alive. And of course, the police ignored or actively aided the attackers in this. And in the aftermath, after a couple of days of this just carnage, this purge, this horrific experience that, again, Mama Josephine Baker was witnessing, was there, who saw things happening, fortunately enough, was far enough away where it didn't directly impact her, but know and believe she was fearful for her own life. And in the aftermath, the National Guard was called in by the Illinois governor. The Illinois governor, because, St. Louis and East St. Louis, Missouri, are right at the southern tip of Illinois. So the Missouri governor, I don't even know, what'd he do? Nothing? The Illinois governor called in the National Guard, which is interesting how the National Guard is being used here today in 2025. But the Illinois governor called in the National Guard not to protect Black citizens, but to restore, quote unquote, order. No white rioters were seriously punished. A few little arrests were made, a little hand smacking, but most of the attackers went free, much like, January 6th attackers went free, at least now. Black survivors received no reparations, no official apology, and most were left homeless. This feels like a huge comparison to what happened just a few years later in Tulsa, Oklahoma, with the same pattern: white mob violence, destruction of prosperous Black communities, and no punishment, and state complicity. I got to take a deep breath after that. The violence that ensues in this country is just unfathomable. Well, not completely, because we're starting to see it again. But the point is, Mama Josephine witnessed this. She was just across the river. She saw and understood what happened. So understand, at the age of 11, she's already on the street. She's already experienced brutality at the hands of the white homeowners with whom she was living with as a child, to be their servant. If that's not still slavery, I don't know what is. And then the racial violence still happening. And that is in the early 1900s, just about 100 years ago. That's not that long. We know Josephine Baker. We are familiar with her, and this is what she experienced as a child. So we give thanks to her, to Mama Josephine, for surviving what she survived, witnessing what she witnessed, and still having the courage to be who the fuck she was. We give thanks to her. By the age 19, she had moved to Paris. She had become a standout performer in black vaudeville and Harlem clubs, and she was known for her comedic flair and stage charisma. She was discovered by a French talent scout in New York who offered her a contract to perform in Paris. And this was about 1925. So she left the US to escape the racism and the violence that was still happening. And she wanted more creative freedoms. And in Paris, she became an instant sensation. Her style was exoticized by the Europeans, but she reclaimed that gaze with sharp wit and subversion. We'll talk more about that later. Well, we'll talk more about it now. She was known for her iconic performance in the banana skirt. You know, all you got to do is Google Josephine Baker, and you're going to see all kinds of images of her in that banana skirt, and as well as memes and images of that. So what she did was, because she was being eroticized as some type of exotic savage figure, she flipped the script. She exaggerated it. She leaned into caricature with the banana skirt and the wild dances. She exaggerated them so much that it became satire. She mocked the colonial fantasies of the primitive by turning them into theater. And she choreographed her own dances. She controlled her image and she decided when and how to be seen. She even turned down some performances that would have given her a lot more money, a lot more resources, but she chose where she showed up and how she showed up. And she brought poise, humor, and irony to the stage, mocking the audience as much as pleasing them. And she didn't assimilate. She didn't look for approval. She was a diva on her own terms, bold, black, and global. So while she was objectified in Europe and flipped it on them, she was still afforded agency that was denied to her in her own home country of the United States of America, in Jim Crow America. She was treated as a second-class citizen here in her home country. She was refused service at American hotels and restaurants in the 1930s and 40s. She had to use back entrances at U.S. venues even when she was the one headlining. Make that make sense. She was banned from performing in some cities because of her ethnicity. They would say her race, but I'm not going to call it her race because race is a construct. She was banned from performing in some cities because she was Black and because she was queer. She demanded to perform only for integrated audiences, and that got her blacklisted in a lot of places. And she has said, I could never live in America again. I've come home. I have to come home to a country where I'm treated with respect. So for those of you Black women and femmes who follow Stephanie Perry and Rashida Dow and the Exodus Summit crew, our need as Black women and femmes to say goodbye to America and the treatment that we receive here is not a new thing, but it's a resurging thing. And I encourage you, if it's something you're interested in, to check out all of the content in the groups and the education that they have to give, because these sisters are helping. I mean, that's why it's called the Exodus Summit. Exiting, getting out. But I digress. Back to Mama Josephine. Now, I mentioned she was openly bisexual in her personal life and radically queer in her resistance. She didn't use modern labels, but historical evidence shows that she had romantic and sexual relationships with both men and women. She was known to be fluid in her presentation and desire. She had affairs with several well-known artists and authors, both in French and Mexico. She maintained deep relationships with chorus girls and frequently spoke of female lovers in private. Now, her adopted son, Jean-Claude Baker, who was one of 12 children that she adopted, she called her Rainbow Tribe. And he has said that my mother had affairs with many women, and she loved whomever she loved. He said that in his biography, his book that he wrote about his mother, Josephine, The Hungry Heart. This woman lived radiating love. So again, although she was not open by modern activist standards, she lived freely. She didn't hide. She included queer culture in her art and her circles. It was a part of who she was. But nothing had to be declared with titles or labels or defined identities and words at that time. She just lived it. Much like in last week when we talk about Ma Rainey, she just lived it. And the artistic community was much more open and accepting of that, but it wasn't anything that they had to go and declare necessarily. They just lived it and sung about it and wrote about it and did the things. They lived and were who they were. Now, all of this at the same time, Mama Josephine was married 4 times to men. She was married, she got married really young when she was back in St. Louis, likely just for survival to, she was about 13. And then she married again a few years later um, to a man named Willie Baker. Now that's where she got her last name Baker, which she kept because by the time she became to be known professionally, she had that last name. They divorced soon after she started performing professionally and moved to New York. And then she married again to a French Jewish businessman in about 1937. Now, that marriage made her a French citizen and gave her political protection during World War II. Now, they divorced after a few years. And then finally, she was married for about 10 years to another French man, a conductor. And together they adopted those children from all different countries, again, and they called them the Rainbow Tribe. But he was discomfortable, uncomfortable with her fame and activism, and he ended the marriage. Now, she never legally remarried after him. His name was Joe Bouillon. She never legally married after him, but she had many, many lovers of all genders. Like I'm saying, this woman loved love. She embodied love in all ways. Her body, her fame, her femininity was part of her superpower to disrupt colonial fantasies and redefine Black womanhood on her own terms. And she was a bad bitch, you know what I'm saying? During World War II, she served as a spy for the French resistance. She used her celebrity status to carry secrets across borders. She hid Jewish refugees and used invisible ink in her sheet music to transmit intelligence. She was awarded by in different ways from Charles de Gaulle for her service. So not only was she an amazing performer and a lover of love, this was a spy. And then she was a key civil rights voice in the US. She returned during the 50s and 60s to support racial justice, again, refusing to perform for segregated audiences. And she spoke at the 1963 March on Washington, and she was the only woman formally to speak. And again, those 12 children that she adopted from different ethnicities, that was her living experiment of an anti-racist global familyhood. It was difficult. They ran into financial problems because she was so generous. And a lot of the war efforts she funded out of her own pocket. But the effort that she made to bring people together to share her love with children, with the audiences she performed for, with the lovers that she had, with nations and countries, with the work that she did during World War II and coming back to the US. This woman was the embodiment of love, unconditional love. She died in 1975 after a sold-out retrospective performance in Paris. And she was the first Black woman honored with a state funeral in France. We give thanks to Mama Josephine Baker. We give thanks to her resilience, her legacy. We give thanks for her love, for her talent, for her courage. We give thanks. So clearly, I think she's dope, but let me break down why I think she's dope. So she broke every boundary. race, class, gender, a nation. She didn't give a fuck. She lived on her terms. As I mentioned, she was born into trauma and poverty, but she transformed herself into an international superstar. She knew her assignment. She knew why she was here. Despite what the world was telling her, the society was telling her, racism told her, despite the limitations that she had. I mean, living on the streets at the age of 8, surviving, moving, finding her way through, finding her way to New York, finding her way to Paris. This woman knew who she was and what she was here for. She knew she was here for greatness. She knew she was here to do more than what she was seeing around her in poverty in St. Louis. And she didn't just perform on stage. She used her platform to challenge white supremacy and patriarchy, both in America and in Europe. She used different strategies for both because she was in different contexts, and she was brilliant enough to understand that. I also think she's dope as fuck because she was openly bisexual and unapologetic about it, even when the world was like, shh, don't tell nobody. And as I said, her son confirmed her queerness, saying that she never hid who she was. In Paris, she reclaimed eroticism by performing in control of her image. She wasn't a victim of Western gaze, but she was more of a curator. And she took control with power of how she was seen. And her romantic and sexual relationships with both men and women and figures that we are well aware of, she was who she was. And for that, I just think she was dope. Now, the other reason or another reason why I think she's dope as fuck is that she used glamour to expose injustice. She's became the most photographed woman in the world during the 1920s, and she used that fame to fight for Black dignity. Yeah, she wore banana skirts, but she did so to mock these colonial fantasies, and she danced right at the edge of stereotype and satire. Getting paid, dancing in the banana skirt, laughing at the she often said, yeah, they laughed, and then she made them laugh, and then she laughed last. While these fools getting excited about her dancing in a banana skirt, and she making fun of them because they're getting excited about her dancing in a damn banana skirt. Another reason why I think she's dope as fuck is that she was a whole spy, a French resistance spy, a U.S. civil rights advocate, and she took care of 12 babies. The military secrets, the pinned messages inside her dress, working for the resistance against the Nazis, speaking at the March on Washington in full military uniform, honey. She used her presence. I can't say it again. She knew who she was and she knew her assignment. So she was able to ebb and flow into that assignment however the opportunity came up. That's the kind of clarity I have been and am looking for and to an extent have received, but I ain't at the Josephine Baker level. But that's the kind of thing we do in my course. Your soul knows the assignment. If you know who you are and you know what you're here for, the challenges that you experience, you see them as part of the mission. The challenges that Mama Josephine Baker experienced at the age of 8 and throughout her life were part of her experience, gave her the courage to know, yeah, I'm going to be a spy. I'm going to do what I need to do for my people because she had that resiliency and the courage that was cultivated within her at that young age. She knew who she was and she knew her assignment. She, without it necessarily naming it, we have names for it now, like karmic debt and our karmic cycles, to understand why things happen to us, especially so early in life. She didn't necessarily have that language, but she had the fire and the light to walk it out. So I think she's dope. And another reason why she was dope is, again, those 12 babies from different racial and ethnic backgrounds, raised them in her chateau, which she eventually lost, but um, another French nobility gave her a place and her children a place to live. Now, some criticize the experiment structure, but it was bold. It was her intentions were good. She wanted to reject the idea of race being an issue that prevented people from loving each other. And the last reason I'll say, there's many reasons why she's dope as fuck, but the last reason I'll say is that she made being quote unquote too much a revolution. She spoke 4 languages. She sang in 4 languages. She headlined in 50 countries. She made space for Black beauty, freedom, and queerness on the world stage. And while white Hollywood rejected her, the world embraced her. She was a global icon until her final breath in 1975. This was a bad bitch. I'm just saying. So, her wisdom, her medicine. How can we look at Mama Josephine Baker's life and apply that legacy of power, pleasure, and politics to our own lives? Well, the first wisdom that I see is that she reframed Western obsession with Black bodies. She said, I wasn't really naked. I simply didn't have any clothes on. And so that reframe, she made it about her controlling how she was seen. She made it about satire and rebellion. Her nudity was her own image, and she used it to expose colonial desire and racist hypocrisy. How can you say Black women or Black people are beneath you, but look at you lusting after this? Look at you paying money to see this. Her performances blurred the line between spectacle and sovereignty, art and activism. So, what can we do? How do we use this wisdom of reframing this obsession with our bodies? We can reclaim the gaze, make it your own. Turn what they fetishize into what you weaponize. Be art, be dangerous, be intentional. At the end of the day, the most important medicine that we can apply from Mama Josephine Baker's wisdom is that visibility does not have to mean vulnerability or danger. It can mean power. It's all about in how you stand in that and how you use it and how you feel internally. We give thanks. Another piece of wisdom that I see from Mama Josephine is that survival and joy are revolutionary, especially for Black women, especially for Black queer women and femmes. Existing, surviving, and having joy is how you revolt. And she's been known to say that the things that she have been able to accomplish that she didn't do because she was afraid to show. Let me say it how she said it in her quote. The things I have been able to accomplish, I did because I was not afraid to show who I really was. Mama didn't hide. She lived publicly as a queer Black woman decades before the world was ready, way before there were words for it. She forced the world to deal with her. It wasn't even duality, multiplicity. She was all the things, and she showed up as all the things. So how do we apply that as medicine in our lives? Be bold. They want us to shrink. They want us to be quiet. They want us to conform. They want us to be in this box of how they want to define women, femininity, feminine energy, Black women, all the different labels and titles for that. They want, and by they, patriarchy, colonizers, enslavers, imperialists, whatever, all the things we label them, but we know who the them is. Be bold. Be who the fuck you are. Remember who the fuck you are and be who the fuck you are. Understand who you are and show up fully and unapologetically as all of that. Don't shrink for safety, expand for freedom, and know that your authenticity is a lifeline. And honey, if live your contradiction, if you got multiple different aspects of who you are, live all of it. You do not have to fit into anybody's boxes. You redefine the box every time you choose to take a breath. There's a line in one of my books where I say we cannot be melted down and poured into a mold and made into caricatures. Only we, Black women and femmes, can define who we are, and we do so moment to moment. Catch up, keep up. So we give thanks to Mama Josephine Baker for embodying that and showing that to us. And the last piece of wisdom from Mama Josephine Baker's life that I see is that, she fought for dignity, and she fought for full freedom and liberation at every level. Even within the World War II, she was fighting for freedom. She's been known to say, I have walked into the palaces of kings and queens and into the houses of presidents and much more. But I could not walk into a hotel in America and get a cup of coffee. Sit with that shit for a minute. What is wrong with the fabric, the foundation of this country that disdains the very people who built this country so much? Whew. Her global fame didn't shield her from this racial construct that is America, and she named it. She exposed how Black excellence is often admired, but also politicized and policed. So what is the medicine? How can we use this fight for dignity and liberation and freedom? How can we use the wisdom that Mama Josephine Baker's life shows us in our own lives? How can we apply this as medicine in our own lives? We can walk with the knowledge that whether you are world famous or literally surviving poverty, you can still be a freedom fighter, because she did all of that. Survived poverty and abuse and racial violence and trauma to become world famous, and still throughout all of it was a freedom fighter. In fact, we could say that how she survived poverty was because she was a freedom fighter. That was her soul's assignment. And how she expressed that assignment very uniquely in her own ways is what made her world famous. She knew what she was here for, and she took that assignment all the way through to every environment, every stage, every place she went. And specifically in applying this medicine, show up and speak truth. Be who you are. And we give thanks to Mama Josephine Baker, queer, Black, and unbothered, but made sure she bothered the shit out of everybody else who was racist and oppressive. Let's take a deep breath. Mama Josephine knew her assignment, and she broke away from the system that oppressed her and her people. And then she mocked the European system that objectified her. She loved who she wanted to love. She lived a full life surrounded by love and radiating it to her rainbow tribe, her friends, and her romantic partners of all genders. And she also radiated love and joy to those who watched her performances. She embodied freedom and she embodied love. And we give thanks to Mama Josephine Baker for living her life unapologetically on her terms, to where years later now, decades later, we're still receiving the glow from that love from her heart. And we give thanks. Take a deep breath. So my upcoming course, Your Soul Knows the Assignment, is how I've poured into us and how I'm hoping to help prepare us all for our journeys, and how we reclaim our unique relationship with courage so that we can live life as boldly as Mama Josephine did, in whatever way that means for us individually, so that we can collectively radiate love, bring about liberation and justice and freedom for all of us. but it starts with being free enough to be who you are, to know who you are, to remember who the fuck you are. So if you're ready, apply now. We start June 26th if you're hearing or seeing this before that. Even if it's after, schedule a vibe check call with me. That's how we start the process of seeing if the class is right for you, or if any of the other offerings that I have are right for you, or I can just provide you with resources and how I can help you on your journey. Because at the end of the day, I just want everyone to show up on this planet as their full, authentic, healed selves, working through karmic debts and patterns so that we can all show up fully and authentically. The link is in the bio or in the description. And I look forward to talking with you. In the meantime, definitely subscribe and share this with another dope Black woman, femme, or gender expansive being so you and they can keep showing up in love and for love. Because the reality is you are loved, you are loving, and you are lovable, no matter what the world might be trying to get you to believe. You are loved, you are loving, and you are lovable. As always, until next time, take good care of you. Peace, y'all.